I'll kind of kick things off by giving you a little bit of the format for today. Um, so obviously you know what's going on since you're here, that the Center for Teaching and Learning is partnering with the Academic Logistics Group to give everybody a chance, two chances really, today and on Monday, to talk mostly about the modified on-campus classes. These are the ones where, because of social distancing, room capacity is highly limited, and the number of students that we have will often not fit into our rooms, which is forcing you folks to be creative in how you teach a class face-to-face-ish, where you can't have everybody in the room at the same time. So we'll have Matt go through a few of the basic models for how to structure classes. This is experimental for many of us. It's compromising on different aspects of teaching for many of us and how we teach the class. So we'll try to give that some framework for you. We also want to hear your ideas about what you're thinking for your classes. Ultimately, how you go about teaching this semester will depend a lot on your learning outcomes, on the number of students you have, on your own teaching style, and your classroom capacity, all of those things blended into one. The technology available in your room, the activities you need to do. We also have Lisa Flood on the line. Lisa is our teaching and learning scholar. She's been thinking through how she's going to teach her nursing classes. She's been thinking through how to do group activities where we have social distance. We can't just say, you guys go over there and cluster together. And then we have Rob Wynn on the line. Rob is Dean of Arts and Sciences. He's also the chair of the Academic Logistics Group. Rob's going to be able to talk about some of the logistics of having a class that has face-to-face components this year. So that would be things like seating charts and keeping attendance, and what happens if your student has an accommodation where they can't be in a face-to-face class. What happens if your student is quarantined? How do you work with a student who's quarantined? How do you work with a student who is not supposed to be on campus because they're showing COVID-like symptoms and they know that they stay home until they're well enough to come back? So let's turn things first over to Matt. And if you have questions or comments, raise them in the chat. We've got enough people that I'll be monitoring the chat for us, and I'll try to get those in or turn the mic over to you when we have good breaking spots. So Matt, take it away.
Hold on.
Yeah, come on, Matt. We only want to hear you once. We don't need the echo.
That sounded like Lene.
I like that there's heckling. Any workshop with heckling is going to be good.
All right, I think I fixed the echo. So good morning, everybody. I thought I would start with just a really brief overview of some of the technology that plays a role with this stuff. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about all of it now, but as we get to talking about the different types of teaching, some of these things will come into play, so I wanted to briefly introduce them. First of all, we've got our classroom technology. Most of you, if not all of you, will be spending some time teaching in the classroom. I guess I'll start by dispelling some rumors that I've heard that there were like massive classroom overhauls over the summer and that there's now cameras in every room and microphones all over the place and robots that run the cameras for you. I didn't actually quite hear that last one, but it was close. None of that happened. So there have been some improvements with additional microphones for instructor stations. But there are not cameras all over the place and stuff like that. So if you're running video conference room within your classrooms, unless you have one of AV's classrooms in Hardin Hall. You'll be using your webcam on your own computer.
Or the document cameras. They added some document cameras.
They replaced some document cameras. Yes, yeah. They upgraded some of the document cameras. So the document cameras would be what you would use for, and we'll talk more about that when we get to talking about the teaching types, but the document cameras are what you would be used for in place of writing on the board if you're Zooming with people, since you won't be able to show the board to remote participants. Our classrooms tend to be pretty well equipped, and since AV took over Class Tech a couple years ago, they've continued to make upgrades, and they've got document cameras in pretty much every room now. There's, like I mentioned, there were some microphones added over the summer. Then you've got your standard complement of technology for your in-class people, such as the projectors and the room speakers, etc. Zoom video conferencing, we've all become quite familiar with since March. We're using it right now, so I won't say anything more about that right now. Online technology for the modified on campus, there's a lot of places that EduCat tools can come into play that might normally be used primarily for online, but whether it's continuing discussions outside class or accepting assignments through your assignment Dropbox, since not all your students would be there to turn things in physically, giving quizzes using the EduCat quiz tool, and possibly in combination with Respondus Monitor if you're having people take tests outside of class. And VoiceThread, a great way to have some interactive conversations asynchronously, since you won't have everybody necessarily in the same place synchronously. Mentioned G Suite there, especially with the Google Docs and spreadsheets and those types of tools. That can be good for collaboration, again, when you're having the social distance and not necessarily able to have students all huddled up together. They can work on documents, whether they're in completely different locations or whether they're just 6 feet apart, using some of the G Suite stuff. And there's a new tool that we just added to our G Suite collection this summer called Jamboard. It's a collaborative whiteboard. So some of those active learning type things where in the past you've been able to send people up to work on the whiteboards, the past and hopefully the future, just not right now. That's a possible tool for doing some of that same similar stuff, but everybody works on their own laptop and they see what everybody else is adding to the virtual whiteboard at a time. I wanted to mention that we have Studio 102 available for doing recordings of yourself if you want to record any of your lectures. And then, of course, we've got our various video streaming tools like Wildcast, and we've also been working more with YouTube lately to help get that stuff out there for your students. So, like I said, that was just really quick. But if you have any questions about that stuff and want to throw them in the chat, I'll pause for a second so Leslie can check the chat.
Now, so far, there is nothing in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, wait, we have things. We have 2 questions. Sebastian asks whether there are still the old microphones. And my understanding is if there's not the old, they haven't removed any microphones. They may have upgraded the microphones.
Right, they have not removed anything. They have added some, not wireless, but the desktop type microphones in some of the smaller rooms that didn't previously have a microphone at all, due to concerns about voices projecting as well from behind the plexiglass and from behind masks.
And we have 2 questions. Jill and Lene both want to know more about Jamboard. How do we access it? Is it through EduCat? And are you going to do a workshop?
Yes, I think we will do a workshop on it. I'd like to get a couple people playing with it first that can maybe help demonstrate it. So, you know, it sounds like Lene and Jill just volunteered.
That's what I heard.
To get to it, if you go up to the little, when you're logged into any of your Google applications, like Gmail or Sheets or whatever, there's the menu of Google applications in the upper right-hand corner. It's a little like series of dots. Looks kind of like tic-tac-toe up next to your name. It will be on that list down near the bottom. You can also just type in your browser jamboard.google.com if you don't see it there.
And Roxanne wants to know if there are multiple computer monitors in classrooms, so they have extended monitors.
In most classrooms, there are not. In a few of the lecture halls, there are those monitors, the touchscreen monitors that were set up to be used as tablets, as writing tablets. And in those, you could probably configure to use that as a second monitor. But largely no.
Let's see, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat right now, but feel free to type them at any point and I'll watch them and interrupt Matt at good interruption points if you have questions.
Leslie's my boss and she likes to interrupt me, so.
I do like to interrupt, although I also encourage all of you to continue to haze him and heckle him, although for the flow of the workshop, I assume that you will be heckling through the chat.
Okay.
Or not, whatever.
So I had an introduction slide here that I somehow shuffled down to the second one, so I'll just breeze past that, but that's who all of us are. Sorry about that, guys. But Leslie had done an excellent job introducing us. So before we start talking about the options, wanted to provide a brief definition, and Rob or Leslie may have something to chip into this, but what we're talking about when we say modified on-campus courses. And I think a lot of you already probably know this, perhaps all of you, but due to social distancing requirements, many face-to-face courses, I think the majority of face-to-face courses, will not be able to have all of the students who are on the roster physically attend all the meetings. And so the idea is that those courses will keep a face-to-face component because our students really want face-to-face, and there's a definite value in having some face-to-face that our faculty appreciate as well. But the delivery is going to need to be modified somehow. And then we're going to talk about those various options for modifying, and there may be some that we haven't thought of that you guys will want to chip in as well. Anything to add there, Rob or Leslie?
I do have a question that's come up, and I'm guessing MSG is Master Sergeant. Is that right? Master Sergeant Ingram? Excellent. My dad retired as a Master Sergeant, so he'd be proud of me. Okay, so Master Sergeant Ingram asks, for classrooms that have no visual or audio capabilities, are there mobile stations with capability to facilitate a hybrid class? First thing I want to do is clarify whether you're talking about a hybrid class or one of these modified online. So why don't you go ahead and unmic, or yep, there we go, or unmute.
Specifically the modified, doing the online and the in-person teaching simultaneously.
Okay, we're trying to be careful with our vocabulary. Hybrid actually has a different meaning on campus. A hybrid class is one that is online and face-to-face, but traditionally that would be your face-to-face would still be in a room together. We're going to end up with some modified on-campus hybrid classes, but the hybrid is a traditional model for online and face-to-face. So just to clarify, that we're talking about the modified on campus. As far as mobile stations, they are trying to develop, or AV is working on putting together a couple mobile stations, but that's limited. What I encourage you to do is contact AV and see what your options are. Most classrooms, though, will be depending on the laptop for having people participate outside of class. Matt's going to give you some options, so you may not necessarily, need to stream students in synchronously with your classes, but most rooms will be dependent solely on the instructor's laptop for that engagement.
Okay, thank you.
Back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Leslie. So the first option we'll talk about just right off the bat, because that's the one that has been highlighted the most, probably not just on campus, but also if you're, following this stuff at all in the news and the Chronicle and things like that, is video conferencing your class meetings so that you've got, I'm just calling them Group A and Group B, depending on how they're divided up. You've got a group of students that are in the classroom with you, and then you've got your Group B, your other students are attending, still listening to your lectures, but they're on via Zoom, and then they swap out places for the next meeting and so on, so that everybody gets some face-to-face time and everybody gets some remote time. The groups are assigned, and that's a very important component of this. The students don't get to choose to go between in-person and Zoom. That's a big difference from what's called the HyFlex or the HyperFlex model that you hear a lot about. The people who invented that model are probably cringing every time they hear somebody say HyFlex or HyperFlex on the news, because the whole point of that was in a non-social distance time. It was to accommodate students moving back and forth at their convenience, and that's very much not what we're able to do right now. So the having face-to-face and Zoom together part is similar to what HyFlex is, but a true HyFlex model, and that's why we're not using that term, allows the students to move back and forth at will. If they feel like coming on a Monday to class, they can. If they don't, they Zoom. We're not doing that. You have to have them assigned into groups so they know what days they're to be in class and what days they're to be remote, if you go with this. There's, like all of these models I'm going to talk about, there are some strengths and there are also some challenges. Personally, I think this one has quite a few challenges, and Lisa's going to help me highlight the strengths and challenges.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm so glad so many of you could join us today. So I think this is a model that many faculty are planning on using, and it has some inherent strengths and challenges. And the strengths are that this probably most resembles what many of us are familiar with doing. And thus there's little difference in our class prep. You have your set of lectures, you've developed perhaps PowerPoints, discussion questions, and you're just going to plan on coming to class and teaching face-to-face with your select group of students, and then your other students would be joining you via Zoom. Most of us have classrooms that have been specifically assigned to us so that they can accommodate about half of our students. So for example, I have 43 students in one of my classes, and my classroom will accommodate about 24, I think. So about half will join me on Monday, the other half will join me on Friday. So it does keep the students, another strength is that it keeps the students on the same class schedule. You're not altering their class times. It keeps them pretty much, your syllabus doesn't have a whole lot of changes in it. Some of the challenges are going to be trying to simultaneously manage your remote students and the students in front of you. Right now, I can only see 10 little images on my Zoom screen with the PowerPoint up. So there's a whole bunch of people attending today that I can't see. I won't have the luxury of having a moderator like Leslie looking at the chat questions that are coming in. So that's going to be a challenge for me in the classroom to attend to the students physically in front of me and also trying to attend to anyone that's attending remotely. I also think that it's going to be a problem with trying to build a sense of community. The people that are remote and the people that are attending, because of the attendance restrictions, those two groups of students will almost be like two separate classes unless you do some strategic types of activities, perhaps online with them to get them to know each other. In the courses that have labs or clinics where those groups of students will be meeting outside of class in smaller sub-segments or subsets, they will be able to build a sense of community. But in some of your larger classes, that will never happen. So I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Relying on the laptop webcam is going to be a challenge for those of you that teach using whiteboards and or perhaps a chalkboard. That's going to be a bit of a challenge using Zoom. So those are some of the different challenges, I think. If students ask questions, whether they're physically with you or remote, you're going to probably have to repeat those questions, do a lot of paraphrasing so that both your audiences can be aware and up to speed with the questions that are being asked by the two different groups of students. So I think that's going to be challenging for faculty.
So we have two questions that have been posted. One is for a clarification. If students don't choose in the room or Zoom, is there a policy we must follow? And so that one, I do want to clarify, you can, one of the ways of dividing your class is to let students choose. The issue here with HyFlex and with the traditional model of HyFlex is that students can choose on any given day. So that I might have a class that meets on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays. My students today might decide, this week might decide that Matt's going to decide he's going to attend on Tuesday but not Wednesday or Thursday. Next week, Matt might decide he's going to attend all 3 days because he's a little confused by the subject matter. In the following week, he's got everything under control, so he doesn't attend face-to-face at all that week. In our case, though, because we need to have control over the number of people who are coming to the classroom and know who's in the room and where they're sitting at any class period, we can't give students that same flexibility of this week I don't want to come on Tuesday, this week I'm going to come on Thursday, because we need to know what the classroom capacity is. We can't risk having every student show up on Thursday when nobody showed up on Tuesday, because we only have a limited number of seats available and we have a seating chart. So that's the part where students can't choose kind of on a day-to-day basis. If you want to have your class divide on who's online and who's face-to-face by having them choose, that's fine. It's really up to the instructor on the method that they use to divide the class. I've heard some instructors are just going to go alphabetically. First half of the alphabet comes on Tuesday, second half of the alphabet comes on Thursday, or however you just decide. But they can't just wake up this morning and decide I'm going to come Thursday, next week I'm going to come Tuesday, unless you're in a room that lets all of your students be in the class at the same time. Leslie Putman asks, if only a few don't fit in the classroom, what if only a few don't fit in the classroom? HyFlex would be much more reasonable. Matt, do you want to weigh in on that one?
I'm not sure I understand the difference between that and Roxanne's question. Again, it comes down to you have to know who's going to be in each place ahead of time, whether it's a few or not. You don't have to necessarily divide them evenly, but you do have to know in advance who your face-to-face students are and who your remote students are. It doesn't, so I think maybe that's part of it, is that, you know, if you have a class room that fits 20 legally and you have 22 students, do you have to have 11 in and 11 out? No, you don't, but you do have to know which ones are going to be out and which ones are going to be in.
And you can't have 22 show up.
Right. Is
Thank you. That answers it.
Okay.
One thing that I would like to add, so those of you that have science labs or clinical classes, I know some of the faculty are looking very carefully at that and trying to look at which groups of students are going to be together in those smaller classrooms, and then maybe trying to assign those groups of students the same in-class day, because there's less chance if there's a contamination or somebody gets sick, then your whole class necessarily wouldn't be in trouble. So like, let's say if I have a lab on Monday afternoon or a lab on Tuesday, I might have that subset of students be assigned my Monday lecture, because they're already going to be together anyways on Monday and on Tuesday. And then my other half of the class that has labs different days of the week, I might try to make my room assignment based on that rather than just splitting the class alphabetically. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you have somebody that is positive in a lab, they would be more likely to be together in the lecture portion and then also in the lab versus mixing everybody up.
And Roxanne has a follow-up question. Roxanne, we'll see if we can get the nuance of this through the chat. If not, you're welcome to unmute and just talk to the group. But Roxanne says, I was planning to have students assign themselves to be in class using the EduCat choice. Is it not allowed? My understanding, and Rob, you might want to weigh in on this, my understanding is that as long as you know who is in your face-to-face classroom on any given day and that you have a seating chart that can be shared in advance with contact tracers, then you can divide the class however you want. But Rob, do you want to weigh in, or Roxanne, do you want to explain more about what you're talking about?
So I'll be happy to jump in here. How you divide your class up, it is really up to the instructor. We have no hard and fast rules of how you divide your class. I think Leslie and Matt have pointed out pretty clearly. The one caveat is, one, you cannot go over the stated capacity for that room for the number of students. And two, you need to know who is in the room every day, and that needs to be documented. And so if you want to do a new seating chart every day, we would discourage that, but that would be up to you. And I think I read a note further down about having their class divided into 3, and you know, and that makes perfect sense, particularly if you have a class that meets 3 days a week. Again, and then I just posted a minute ago, I happened to talk to a faculty member earlier today that sent out a note to his class and said, you know, here's how we're going to divide the class up. And several of them reached back out and said, look, I would be more comfortable doing the class entirely by Zoom because they volunteered. The rest of the class actually can be face-to-face in every session. And so, but again, that is up to the instructor. We're not, our goal here is not to limit how you divide your class or how you present your material. It's really just a few limits on how many people can be in the room, and the reality is we need to know who's there so that if and when we have a positive test, we know who was close to that person.
Jill asks a Zoom tech question, and I think the answer is yes. The question is, can we have the in-class students also be on Zoom to facilitate Zoom groups with all of the students? I'm thinking the answer is yes, provided they all have their own laptops, and you'll probably want them to have earbuds and microphones if they're all going to be talking, like the ones they use with their phone. Matt, does that sound right?
That does sound right. There's definitely a chance of chaos there, and the earbuds and microphones would help. If without that, it would not work well at all. If they're actually going to be using audio, if they were just typing to each other, it would still probably be okay. The room should be able to handle the bandwidth if everybody in the building we're doing it, but there might be issues with that many video streams at once, but that's unlikely anyway. So yeah, give it a shot.
You might want to have everybody also join if you're using polling in Zoom.
Oh yeah, that's good. Gary has a comment about some technology that he's planning to use. We already talked about Tim Harris's issue of 3 groups. Absolutely, have at it. Jill is in favor of chaos, as we would expect her to be. We'll get to seating charts and attendance later, but the short answer is yes, you can have attendance can be done with pictures. If everyone fits, and Lene asks if everyone fits and we don't need to divide our class, the first thing you should do is thank Josh Santiago for making that happen, because that's pretty rare on campus. We still need to plan for students to be isolated. Therefore, yes, well, we'll talk more about if they're isolated for exposure, Zoom may or may not be the instructor's solution. And Norma will get to more about attendance later. Let's have Matt move on to the model of flipping as a possibility for another way to handle a modified class.
Okay, so flipping is, of course, not new. We've been talking about flipping as part of active learning at NMU for probably 8-9 years now. It happens to have a lot of potential for in this situation. So what would happen here would be, as an instructor, you would pre-record your lecture, and or not, it could be some combination of assigning some other primary content delivery like textbook readings or videos from some other source that are done outside of class time. And then your students still divided into groups. And I'm just using the group A and group B example. The same things we just talked about, the different ways to divide groups still apply, of course. Do the same in-class activities, but they do them on different days. So you're not, at this point, you're not necessarily probably having to zoom in people. You can focus just on the students in the room. Everybody's getting your lectures outside of class, and they're doing the activities. They're just a little bit spread out more over different days. So again, we've got some strengths and challenges, and I'll turn to Lisa for that part. Lisa?
Uh-oh, she may have frozen.
Okay, can everybody hear me? My
Well-
internet's a little weak.
Yep.
Can you hear me now? My internet's a little bit weak, so Matt got a little wonky there. So with flipping, as Matt was mentioning, that some of the strengths are that you only have to attend to the students that are physically in class with you, and you can focus on active learning, getting them to use the content that you presented in some other manner prior to them coming to class. So there's going to be less problems with technology. Some of the challenges are you're going to have to, if you choose to use this, and this is one of the models that I'm going to use, you have to do some additional prep by recording if you're using lectures or coming up with some other type of out-of-class assignments. Some of the due dates might be different to manage for the different groups if you're having any pre-class quizzes or any type of assignments that they're turning in. And then if you're using things in class that you normally would have had them doing, like working in small groups side by side, you're going to have to change that in the socially distanced classroom or come up with some other type of strategy, such as using a Google Doc, like we mentioned already, or some other type of collaborative technology like Jamboard.
Are there any questions or comments about this model? We do have several questions and comments about various things with attendance and keeping track of attendance. We will get to that. We know that's a very, very hot issue on campus for anybody who has any kind of face-to-face component.
Should I go on, Leslie?
Yep, go ahead and go on, and we'll come back if somebody types in a question. We'll just get to it.
So the third model that we've outlined here, we weren't sure exactly what to call it, and I ended up calling it partial flipping. So this is where you would pre-record some of your lectures or assign some of the primary content in some other form, be it YouTube videos or Khan Academy or textbook readings or whatever. But then the content that you think is the most important stuff that you provide the most value to, that needs that professor explanation that they can't just get from a third thing, you reserve that and give a smaller number of in-class lectures. You again deliver those lectures multiple times on separate days to the different groups of students. So just like with the flipping model, you're not zooming in students, you're just able to focus on those students who are in the room. Again, we've got some strengths and we've got some challenges, and you start to hear some of the strengths and challenges that are similar to the ones we've already talked about. So you want to provide a few words on those, Lisa?
Yeah. Yeah, so most of these are very similar, as you can see. You could also use partial flipping to have your in-class time spent with problem solving, focusing on critical thinking, having perhaps unfolding case studies or small group work with problems. You could assign students some case studies ahead of time and have the groups present on the case studies. So again, there's some challenges for the faculty because there's additional content prep. And then possibly managing different due dates with the different groups. So in some ways, you kind of have two different classes within a class that you have to manage. But one of the advantages of doing either partial flipping or flipping is that as a faculty member, you want to think about what is the best use of your time in class with these students. What content could they get on their own outside of class, and what do they really need your expertise for face-to-face to lead them through? What are the important concepts, connections that you have to make, ties to previously learned material? And again, that goes back to what do you want them to be able to accomplish at the end of your class? For me, I want them to be able to think critically like a nurse using medical surgical nursing concepts. So how can I best do that? Can I get that material to them outside of class and then spend my in-class time helping them develop those critical thinking skills? And what methods would be the most useful for me to do that? Questions?
Anybody? I have not seen any new questions yet to the chat. So far, the ones that we're waiting for are about attendance. So
Okay.
I think we're good to move on.
Well, good timing then, because here we are on attendance, and I'm going to leave that one to Rob.
All right. Thanks, Matt, and thanks for all the questions. So a couple of things about attendance that I wanted to make sure was clear to everyone. Primarily because of the need for, or the possible need for tracking and tracing, it's important that we have attendance for the students that are in face-to-face classes. Now, Norma asked the question, if I have a seating chart, can I then take a picture of the room? That is perfectly acceptable. You can do, someone asked in classes that use clickers, can we use the clicker? That would be acceptable. You can do a for-credit or a not-for-credit quiz. If your class is small, you can call roll. All we need to know is on any given day who was in the room. Additionally, we will need every face-to-face class. And so I realize for many of you, that means that you may have to have two, or in the case of Tim Harris's question, you may need to have 3 seating charts for a class. I think that if you stress with your students that first day, you can either assign them to seats or you can let them self-select and then fill in where they are. That's where they need to sit for the rest of the semester. And that way, if a student tests positive, we can give the public health individual a copy of the seating chart so they know who was the closest to that student in the room, as well as the attendance for that day, and they will know who to contact. So our facilities people have done and are continuing to do a really good job of providing us with some CAD generated seating charts. Those will be available for download early next week. Working with Leslie and others, we're working on an upload system where you'll be able to go in, fill in some data, you know, the name of your class, when it meets some other data so that we can sort easily and then just attach that seating chart. If it doesn't change, then you need to do it one time, and that will be good for the semester. Let's talk a little bit about absence types. And so the recommendation from the academic work group was that a student who has COVID or COVID-like symptoms will be excused and will be allowed to make up work. Someone asked about students who are quarantining. Will we have to do Zoom? We are not required to provide them with a synchronous option. You just have to allow them to make up work. Now, if you choose to do Zoom for them, that's great, but how you let the student make up that work will be up to the instructor. The one caveat to that is we do have students on campus who will receive a remote learning accommodation through disability services. In that case, we need to work with Harger Bowl, the student, and the instructor to come up with a synchronous or near synchronous version of the course for that student who will be remote all the time. Now, it is clear that there are some classes where that is not possible, and between disability services and the instructor will figure out how to meet those students. I will say, as of yesterday, the number of students who had received a remote-only learning accommodation was less than 20. So there are not a lot of those right now, but that may change as more students come back to campus. Questions? I do have on my screen, I do have one of the seating charts that facilities has produced. Leslie, if you want to let me share, I can at least show someone what that looks like and what they'll need to fill out.
I actually turned that on for you, Rob. So.
Okay. And you need to stop sharing, Matt,
Yeah.
so that you can.
All right, so you should be seeing my screen now. So this would be a seating chart for McClintock room 114. The TS is the teacher station. You see where the doors are. These are where the seats are in this room. This happens to be a room with a capacity of 40. These will be where your seats are. You can just write in the names of the students, and then you would just say this is a PDF and upload it. Again, this is McClintock 122, has a room capacity of 12. Teacher station, write in who's there. 117, and so on. So you give you an idea. The one challenge will be if you are in one of the very large classrooms, like Jamrich 1100, there will not be room to write the students' names on the seating charts. But in those rooms, the seats are already numbered, and so you will have to put together either a Word document or a spreadsheet that has which students are in which seat and number. I realize a little more challenging. It may take up much of your first day of class, but again, you only need to do that one time.
Rob, I'd like to add one thing that you said about seating. There could be accommodations for certain students to have specific seats within the classroom, and you would be notified by disability services if that's the case. But there might be students that approach you that perhaps maybe have a hearing disorder or someone who has PTSD, and they have to be near an exit. So just kind of keep in mind that there may be students that have specific seating requests. There's not a lot of them, but there are some that Harger has been working with.
And in response to Norma's question, yes, if someone has a remote learning accommodation, Disability Services will be producing a letter that will come to you as well as an email. Sebastian, have all students been notified that they can go online? The ability to go online is really up to the instructor. So if that's not something that as an instructor that you're willing to, and there are some classes where that's just not an option. Again, that is up to the instructor. If you choose to let them not come face-to-face, the class will still have a face-to-face component.
All students have been notified that they can request disability accommodations, though. So
Yeah, that was my question.
Yep, they have been told. So there are various rumors about whether or not students get to choose, whether the faculty member is choosing, whether it's completely online. So there are a couple different paths for each. All students and all faculty have been told that there is a process for accommodations if you're in a vulnerable group that can't come to class. Students who need that accommodation as students would go through Disability Services. Faculty, other staff members, student employees who need an accommodation on their employment side would go through Human Resources. So a graduate student, for example, who takes classes and teaches classes, who is medically not, shouldn't be coming to class, would actually work through both of those paths. They would work through Disability Services for an accommodation for themselves as student. They would work through HR for an accommodation for themselves as instructor graduate assistant. And that message has, as far as I know, has gone out to everybody. Let's see, we have some other questions. Let's see, Norma, have your questions been answered about taking attendance? So taking attendance, photos are possible as long as you make sure you capture any latecomers. So make sure you don't have to actually call roll every time. Oh, yay, thumbs up from Norma. Let's see. Is there a tool to help keep track of those students and the number of students, the amount of students that come in to use labs after hours? Rob, you want to take that one for labs after hours?
We will need to have a way to know who's coming in after hours. That will depend on the building and how that is controlled. So for some buildings, we have monitors. They will have to keep track of who comes in and out. I know that Art and Design has already figured out ways to monitor who's in and out. If it's a lab for a class, the instructor will have to have some idea of who might be coming in to make those rooms available. If it's a research area, then the faculty member will need to know who's coming in and out. And again, just to make sure that they're following the rules that have been set. We certainly want students to have access to the facilities that they would have had before COVID. We just need to make sure that they're doing it in a safe fashion.
Gary Brunswick asks an interesting question. I haven't heard this discussed. Rob, maybe you've got something. Given the social distancing seating in classrooms, should students be encouraged to place their book bags, etc., on the adjoining vacant seats versus on the floor, which would seem to be a surface which is less safe? I'm not sure, Gary, what do you mean by less safe on the floor versus on the chairs?
I thought I read earlier in the summer, floor surfaces are rampant with the COVID-19 virus, and it is sustained longer, et cetera. I don't know. It just seems to me that students are going to have a lot of extra space around them. And it might be just simple to put extra materials next to them or on the seats. And on a related topic, I teach in Janrich 1311 and 1313 in the fall. I noticed all of the extra seats were removed, which is a good idea. So they would have to use the tables. But I noticed also that there usually is 1 to 2 extra tables near the instructor station, and those are gone also.
Those are gone also. Yeah, if you miss them and you ever want to visit them, they are actually in the library now, because we had a lot of space and we had way too many extra chairs. So we were able to take some of the Jam-Rich tables and put them over here.
And I would appreciate having, and maybe other faculty would, having an extra table or 2 next to the instructor station for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. But I'd like to have a little bit extra room to put my bags, other materials that I might reference, etc. I raised this point with my dean earlier today, so.
And she did reach out. I haven't heard the result of that yet, Gary. The other part of your question, in rooms that have fixed seating, so we tried to take tables and chairs out of rooms so that it's clear where to sit, and so students are forced to maintain social distance. In rooms with fixed seating, there will be chairs that have labels on them that say "do not sit here," much like if you go into many places in town. And if the students put their bags on those surfaces, that will be fine. No one should be sitting in them for the entire semester.
I'm not sure. The last I heard when I was talking about extra seats with facilities, and given that things sometimes are changing very rapidly right now, I'm not sure what the latest is, but the last I had heard a few days ago was that they would not necessarily be marking every seat in Jam-Rich 1100 with the "do not sit here," that they were finding that there were just, it was overwhelming to have so many stickers because the capacity is changing so much. So even if you see chairs that don't have the stickers in a room where you say that is that it's closer than 6 feet, don't rely on the stickers to tell you what social distance is. They have to be at least 6 feet apart. I have seen that the classrooms are being marked on the floor to show where tables belong. I think there's still some classrooms that don't have that yet, but a lot of the rooms already have spots that show this is where your table needs to go in order to have 6 feet social distance.
Which is, it's a good point to bring up that we didn't specifically have in our outline here, but I walked through Jam-Rich the other day and they were still in progress of putting those stickers on the floor. They were still in progress of putting plexiglass up to divide the trapezoidal tables into 2 so that you could have 2 people sit at them. And I mean, it's such a big change from what we designed that those rooms to be. Several of us in here were actually involved with that, and having the portable tables was a big thing. And right now it's like the fact that they all have wheels on them is kind of a negative because they're not supposed to be moved and they're not supposed to be grouped up. And the plexiglass is going to be in a lot of places by the time school starts.
At the larger lectures that'll have plexiglass barriers, I know the hardware that they needed to put those up just came in, I think, over the weekend. So they're working. Let's go back and check our chat. So Lene wants to know, can we upload these seating chart templates to Google and then have students type their name in them on the first day? That's an interesting question because they are PDFs, so we'd need something that could be written on, we need to convert it. Matt, is this something where your Jamboard could help with that? If you had a PDF, could you display it on Jamboard and have people write on that and then capture it somehow?
I don't think it will work with PDFs. I can play with it, but I'm pretty sure it won't.
That's a really good question. Does anybody else know if there's a good way to make that work with Google? Because we don't want to pass a sheet around and have everybody write your name on it. That's not what we're doing this semester. Does anybody know if we can make Lene's idea work in Google?
You can edit a PDF file. You can make a box, and then the students can type in their name in it.
on a PDF, or you'd need to do something else?
No, it's a form. It's a form, but it's a PDF form, and then you create that form. You put the boxes, and they are blank, and then the students can type in their names in that.
Do you need Acrobat Pro for that?
Yeah. Well, not the person typing, but you, yes, for creating the form, yes.
Okay, interesting. So if you don't have Acrobat Pro and you need it, we do have a limited number of licenses with those. If that's something that you're going to do
I'm
in,
not sure how that would work
Way.
collaboratively, though.
what's that?
I'm not sure how that would work collaboratively. I mean, you're still in the, how does the file go from person to person with the updates?
Yeah.
Because that's one thing Google, I don't think, has done yet, is make it so you can fill out a form right through like Google Drive and have everybody's stuff show up on it if a bunch of people are working on it.
What about the EduCat? Does EduCat have a whiteboard feature that could display a PDF and have people write on it?
No.
Well, I was about to say that we'll play with this, but then I was going to really depend on Matt. So Matt, do you guys have somebody who could play with that right now? I know you're busy with a lot of other stuff right now.
We can look into it. I don't have any optimistic solution off the top of my head. It's definitely worth checking out to see if we can come up with something, but I wouldn't count on it.
That's okay. I was just thinking for large classes, that might be something to do, but I really like Norma's idea. Just take a picture. That is the easiest thing to do as long as you know faces under masks.
The picture works for attendance. The seating chart only works if you know who all the students are.
Right, with their mask on. Exactly. Got it.
Yeah.
So one suggestion that I'm going to try, and I do have a smaller class, is to help build community. I'm going to have the student talk to the person next to them once they have their assigned seat, and then I'm going to have them help me take roll each day. So if they look over and they see the seat is empty, they can tell me, that's Joe Smith, he's gone today. So I thought that would be one way to try to expedite that process, because those of you that have larger classes, if you're just taking a picture, you're still going to have to go back and try to figure out who was gone for a particular day or who was absent. But maybe if the student next to that person can say, Betsy's gone today, Joe's gone today, that might be a way to try to make that process go a little smoother. I think that'll take faculty time. And then the other thing to keep in mind is you're going to also have to allow yourself some time for some room cleaning if you want to wipe down your teaching station when you're finished with your class, and or if students coming into your class are going to feel the need to wipe down their desk space.
So if I could jump in just for a minute. So the purpose of the seating charts and the attendance are really, there's really just one reason, and that is if a student in your class contracts COVID-19 and is tested positive, then the county or the state tracers will need to contact the people that were closest to that individual. And so they would contact our safety people, who would give them a copy of the seating chart. And so I see some questions on here. That you only need to make a seating chart one time as long as the students remain in those seats. And so they would give them a copy of the seating chart that would list all the students in the class. They would then ask you for just a list of attendees on a limited number of days. Now, that list could just be, you would give them a photo of the class on those days. Then the tracer would look at that photo and say, okay, here is our COVID-19 student and all the seats around them are filled. I will contact all of those students based on the seating chart. If they looked at it and said, 2 of the seats nearest to them are empty, then they would look at the seating chart and would not try to contact those students, or may not try to contact those students. The other thing is they may contact those students just to confirm that they were not in class that day. So you don't have to turn in seating charts over and over again unless they change. And you don't have to turn in attendance unless you are specifically asked for it for a particular day. The seating chart, I'm going to be honest, the seating chart is much more important than the attendance, because the tracer can always go back and contact all of the students who were assigned to sit around that student if for some reason you did not have attendance for that day. But without a seating chart, they don't know who was there, and they would have to contact everyone in the class, which would be a mountain of work if it's a larger class. And so our goal here is just to streamline tracing if you have a positive case in your class.
So we have a big pile of questions in the chat. Let's see what we can get through. When will we have the CAD seating chart of each classroom available, and how will we be notified? We expect them to be available early next week, and we'll send out messages to the faculty. Is that right, Rob?
Right, and there'll be a link where you will just click and go in, and then you can download the ones that are specific to your classroom. I will say at one point we had hoped to just make them publicly available, but there will be a link that you'll probably have to use your NMU password to get to them for various reasons that are not related to COVID-19.
Are the seats numbered in the classrooms? Generally, no. It's only if you're in something like, if you're teaching in Forrest Roberts Theater, or if you're teaching in Jammers 1100, something where there might occasionally be ticket sales for it, you would have numbered seats. Reynolds Recital Hall, I think, has numbered seats, but generally your seats will not be numbered. Jill has a question for Rob about research labs. Rob, does after hours also apply to research labs? Can we just have the students sign in for a room and a time?
And that will be fine. If for research labs, I think that our only concern is that the faculty member have some idea of how many are going in. If you don't monitor it, we don't want your entire research group of 8 or 10 students in there at one time. And I know for research labs, they already have a submitted safety plan, which limits the number of students at one time. So as long as they're following their plan, we're fine with students being in there after hours.
And then we have some technology suggestions for sharing. I think a lot of these go back to Lene's question of having students be able to type their own name in, editable PDFs, possibly. They can type on the PDF as long as they have Adobe. Jill suggests a PowerPoint slide and have them share it. Jill, tell me what do you mean by that as far as sharing the PowerPoint slide? Something that they can write on, or what do you have in mind? Did Jill skip out on us?
I hope she didn't, but what I interpreted that to mean was put the PowerPoint slide in Google Slides and make it available for all the students to type their name on their seat, and I like that idea.
That Jill, she's clever. Let's see. Jason suggests a Google spreadsheet that everyone has access to for after hours for signing in. That's a good idea. Let's see. Jill asks a question about cleaning. Are students supposed to wipe down their own space, and will we have wipes for them? Rob, do you have the latest update on cleaning for classrooms?
So the last update I got was that every room will have materials to wipe down as students come in and faculty members come in. They will be encouraged to wipe down their seats before they start. For students, if they choose not to do that, we can't force them to. For faculty, we'll encourage them to come in and wipe down the teaching station as they come in. it's probably, particularly for faculty, good manners to wipe it down as you leave also. But there will be materials in every classroom for students to be able to wipe down where they'll be sitting.
But we don't have, we won't have custodial support to clean between every classes. So there will be a lot of responsibility on the students and the instructor for cleaning, if they want to sit at a space that they know has been cleaned right before them. James is reminding everyone about HIPAA. Rob, do you want to talk any about how HIPAA plays into what faculty know and what they will and won't know and what they can share?
Right, and that's the whole, while you'll be asked for your seating chart, you might be able to guess that someone in your class has contracted COVID. You won't be told who that is. You won't be asked to name the students in a certain spot. You'll just provide seating chart and attendance, and then someone who's trained in HIPAA compliance will take care of that. There are also some questions. We already talked about taking a picture of your class. If there's any issues with that, we've determined that there's not, either with FERPA or other things. So I think that we've thought about where we are with those laws, and we'll be fine.
We will. One of the things that we're thinking about that doesn't relate to anybody else in this room other than me, I don't think, but we do have some other privacy rules that apply. So there is actually in Michigan a specific Library Privacy Act. So one thing that I cannot do is have everybody sign in to use the library, and so that I can provide that to contact tracers. There is no exemption in the Library Privacy Act to be able to share library records in this situation. Library Privacy Act is pretty clear that it's subpoena or written consent of the patron, but that doesn't apply to most of you, but it's something that we are aware of. Health departments are aware of it, and I've shared that information with the university too, just so that we are watching to make sure that we're abiding by privacy and it's not the Wild West for privacy. Tanya asks, I have a smaller class. Can I change my seating chart a few times per semester? Sure. You just need to make sure that you provide the updated ones and that the contact tracers would be able to know which one is the current one. So as we're currently building the system for submitting the seating charts, we'll depending on what sort of system we build, we may need some extra help knowing if you're swapping one out so that we don't miss something and make sure that we don't want to miss the most current. But yeah, if you wanted to change your seating chart every day, I guess you could. I really wouldn't suggest it, but Rob, do you have anything to add to that?
You're right. You can change them. We'll have to figure out in our system where you upload them some sort of timestamp so we can go to the most current. And yep. I think that's pretty simple to do. And so you could search the class, and then if multiples of that class came up, just search by the timestamp.
Yep. And the system that I was playing with yesterday does automatically have a timestamp for when something's submitted, I think. Let's see. I think we have exhausted our questions. Was there any more of the presentation that was planned?
We had a couple more things. Yeah. One was just, we were interested in hearing from the people who were here how they plan to approach their modified courses, if they had ideas that maybe we hadn't discussed, or if after having these things knock around in their head for half an hour, if they had questions that hadn't been asked earlier about the different types or ways. So we wanted to put an opportunity out there for discussion, since a lot of faculty aren't seeing each other themselves right now either. but they're very quiet.
That surprises me. You know, there are very few people at Northern who tend to be quiet.
Yeah, he's still here too.
Yeah, I think I want to see something that one thing all this changed in me is the way I give tests. In the past, all the math tests are given close to book and being monitored. But since the summertime and we give the class and the test, we cannot find the proctors and all that. So it become an open book test, even though we want close book, very difficult to monitor. In order for the open book test to work, and we have to give assignments and graded assignments, so they will do daily, because it's assigned by online systems. And then the test will be focused on how much have you done your homework. So if you've done your homework, the test basically will reflect. If you haven't done the homework, then you will have trouble with the test. So I think in that sense, the open book test actually can work. And of course, the test problem must be shuffled. So students won't be able to easily copy each other, and must be timed. So they have to be timed. They don't have time to learn the whole thing by looking up. If they know the problem, if they have done the homework and they say, okay, I did that problem in homework, if they look it up, then they can do it. So in other words, open book. So that's my comments.
I think that's a really good point, Roxanne. A lot of people stay really focused on how can I better proctor, and I think looking at different approaches for what is the assessment really assessing, whether they know how to do it, whether they can use the reference information, that's another great way to look at it.
So I think Gary brings up a great point in the chat. Maybe we need to do this 2 or 3 weeks into the semester, have another one of these and see what is working well and what's not working very well at all. And so people can change on the fly. I think that's a great idea.
We do have Sebastian's asking how people are planning to facilitate discussion sections. Anybody want to weigh in on discussion sections? Nobody wants to weigh in on discussions? So Sebastian, are these going to be, when you have the discussion sections, are you going to have all of your students participating face-to-face, or what's your room going to look like for the discussion section? How many will be online? Are you trying to have any synchronously online?
No, it would be half of the class on campus. And for another discussion that I have, it would be everyone at the same time. But my question is, you know, when you have a discussion, you go close to the students and you help them, you know, to go through an exercise, but we cannot be close to a student. So how can we do that? Because, you know, normally you go from students to students and then you say, okay, what are you doing? Where are you stuck? What do you want to do? What do you think you should be doing in terms of, you know, approaching an exercise? We won't be able to do that. So that's why I'm kind of stuck.
That would actually be a great segue to our last slide, and I'm not cutting off any of the other questions that were already in there, but that is something that we wanted to talk about, where some of these challenges of collaboration in the physically distanced classroom, because along with the things that Sebastian just listed, I know there's some classes that use physical manipulatives for things like that aren't labs, but that have things that are right in the class, models and such that people use. You can't really be sharing physical manipulatives during a pandemic. We've already touched on the limited, if any, use of physical whiteboard activities. If you have a really small class and you're in a really big room, you might still be able to have students use the whiteboards for stuff. But by and large, I think that they are not going to be accommodation for social distances. And then the third bullet there is just basically what Sebastian, I think you were touching on, that, you know, no huddling up and getting together for that small work. I'd be interested to hear what other faculty have to say. I'll mention a few things that we were talking about the other day here, is using some of the technology to help facilitate that stuff. So You might not be able to group, well, you won't be able to group up, have 4 students sitting real close to each other, but you could still put them in a breakout room on Zoom. You could assign, I'm just going to say 4 students. I don't know how big your groups are. This is just my example. You could give them each a Google document or a Google Sketch assignment, any of those shared things that Google has that they're, we've all been using quite a bit ourselves to collaborate while we're distant. You could assign groups to those things and have them work more on those online things, even if they're in the classroom, and they can ask you questions because you're there. Those are some ideas that we had. That Jamboard I mentioned earlier, a new virtual whiteboard tool, is something that some of that group work might work for. I'm curious to hear what other ideas people have.
One thing, Sebastian, that I thought of is you could put them ahead of time into small groups and EduCat discussion forums, have them work collaboratively on some discussion questions and have them report out in their groups when you come to class.
And we have a couple other things that have been shared as far as ideas or plans in the discussion. We do have, I want to make sure that we get the things that are questions that are covered. Lori asks, and I think this will be a Rob question, Lori asks if we can discuss again what the procedure is if a student has been diagnosed with COVID or has been exposed to COVID. Does the student notify the instructor at that point? She says she has small classes, so other students will also note when anyone is absent. So Rob, can you talk about that a little more?
Absolutely. So this came up earlier this week. How do students, if they've been diagnosed or are just sick, how do they contact their faculty member? So preferentially, they would email and just say, I'm sick, I will not be coming to class today. I will say that the safety group and the Health Matters group with the Health Center are working on maybe a form that the students would fill out, which would then be sent to their faculty members saying that they have COVID or COVID-like symptoms. If a student actually tests positive as the faculty member, you will not be told you have that student, X has COVID. You will just be told that a student in your class tested positive. The tracer will be contacting students who sit around them, and then obviously they will be missing. You won't be told who that is. It probably won't take too much to figure out who that person might be if the class is small. I think getting to the part of your question is, we do need to figure out a way to allow that student to do the work that they're going to be missing. So if that means that they join via Zoom, if that means that you give them assignments outside of class so they can do the work. Students who are missing class because of illness, we need to let them make up that work in some fashion. Mostly because we do not want students who wake up and don't feel well to say, oh, if I don't go to class today, I'm going to lose points from class. I'm going to go. Our key here is we want students who are ill to stay away. Just like we want faculty members who are ill to stay home. We've all come to work not feeling the best. And we really need to have people who are sick not come to work.
So that's going to be a challenge for faculty in a couple ways. One is that any one of us might also be the one who has to stay home because we're feeling a symptom that doesn't incapacitate us. It's the kind of thing where last year at this time, if I had a sore throat or a headache that I wasn't expecting that morning, I would probably just come to work. We can't do that anymore. So we have some options about whether, for us as employees, we have options about whether or not we're working remotely or taking sick leave, depending on how we feel. But if I were in a classroom this year, I'd want to be very conscious of the fact that I might wake up and decide that I need to teach remotely that day. And so that's an option for you, because you shouldn't come to work if you wake up with a headache or any of those other symptoms of COVID, or if you've been told to quarantine because you were exposed to something. So, Rob, what message is going out to the faculty regarding their need to sometimes switch to remote, and how that would be done?
I know there's some messaging is being crafted right now. And let me just add to what Leslie said. So if you wake up in the morning and you're not feeling well and you need to go to remote, that first day going to remote may mean an email to your students saying, I'm not going to be able to be in class today. Please read these pages. Please review this. That might be what going remote means for that first day, as you figure out how you might have to, go remote for a longer period of time. Keep in mind, it may not be that you're sick at all. Many of us, have households, and if my child gets sick or gets exposed to COVID, the doctor at the health center, Dr. Kirkpatrick, may tell you that you need to quarantine for up to 2 weeks. And so you will have to have thought about, you will have to have thought about how you'll teach your class if you're the one who can't come in.
And that actually, I heard Mike Bath say yesterday that the CDC has changed some guidelines. So depending on the nature of the quarantine, it might even be longer than 2 weeks. It might be closer to 3. But that's something where you'd be working with your doctor to figure out what your quarantine period is. But I anticipate that those things will happen to us and not just our students. So Lene reminds us that if the COVID student was sitting close to the instructor, and the instructor needs to isolate, this affects all of the instructor's courses. Switching to remote learning will impact all of the instructor's students. Yeah, that's going to be tough.
And students are just going to have to recognize that they have a face-to-face class that, may not meet face-to-face. Now, I have talked with every department head in my college, and we've come up with strategies. So if faculty members have to quarantine, or if someone is sick, every department has a plan of how other faculty members might step in and cover those classes for a period of time. I think Leslie said at the beginning, nothing here is ideal, but I think that there are workarounds. We have a very collaborative collegial group here at Northern, and we'll pick up the slack where we can for each other.
There was a question about Zoom breakout rooms, which Stacy and Matt have responded to in the chat. Matt posted a link with a CTL video that shows how to use various aspects of Zoom. And then there's a demonstration of setting up breakout rooms beginning around the 11:45 mark for that video. And Matt, do you have any more of the Zoom workshops scheduled? I know you just had one, didn't you? Or just had a couple of them?
We just had 2. We don't have any more scheduled right now, but we will be scheduling more Zoom workshops, as well as a couple more Respondus Monitor workshops. At this point, they will probably be after school starts, unless we try to squeeze in one next week. But I have a feeling people are going to be pretty busy next week and not looking to attend a lot of workshops.
And you'll try to get a Jamboard one in pretty soon? We had some requests for that at the beginning.
Sure, I'll work with my 2 volunteers, Jill and Lene.
Excellent.
We'll see how our Jamboard session works.
Excellent. We are just about out of time. If anybody has a question that we missed, now would be the time to say so. Or Rob, Matt, or Lisa, if there's anything you'd like to add. We have recorded this session, and we will do another one like this on Monday. Is that it? Monday is the next one?
It is Monday, yes. So tell your friends.
That's right.
So I think I can speak for Matt, Leslie, Lisa, and myself. If you have questions, feel free to email any or all of us. We'll do our best to get back promptly. It's a challenging time for all of us, and we'll do what we can to help everyone get through it.
All right. Anything?
Yes, thank you, everyone. I really liked Gary's idea about meeting again and talking about what's working, what's not working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. It looked like, including the presenters, we had 30 people for most of the time. So that could mean on Monday we have a whole lot more. It could mean that they watch this recording and decide that they are perfectly comfortable with all their questions answered. So, but we'll see. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.